Aisha Hayes stood by the window of her modest apartment in Atlanta, Georgia, her gaze fixed on the overcast sky. The grayness above seemed to mirror the storm brewing within her. Rain lashed against the glass, the individual drops blurring into formless streaks, much like her life had spiraled into chaos over the past few months. Welcome to Betty Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe and like this video. Now, let's get back to the story. I'm sure you'll be hooked if you listen until the end. Aisha, are you still there? A frail voice called from the adjacent room. The 23-year-old sighed, absently smoothing a stray strand of her dark hair. She had long mastered the art of concealing her true emotions behind a practiced smile. But today, even that familiar mask felt precarious, threatening to shatter. "Yes, Mom, I'm coming," she replied, forcing a cheerful tone. Her mother's room carried the heavy scent of medicine and stale air. Lena Hayes lay in bed, her once vibrant face now gaunt and drawn, her eyes clouded with pain and unrelenting exhaustion. The illness had been relentlessly consuming her for nearly a year, and the family's meager resources were utterly insufficient for proper treatment. "I brought you some tea." Aisha gently placed the cup on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Don't ask," her mother replied, attempting a smile that fell closer to a grimace. "Where's your father, Dad? He went to talk to those people." Lena closed her eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "God, how did things get so bad?" "I told Marcus not to take money from them. I told him." Aisha squeezed her mother's hand, offering what comfort she could. She vividly recalled that day 3 months ago when her father had returned home with a wad of bills, money that seemed like a miracle, enough for her mother's surgery, which they could never have afforded otherwise. "Where did this come from?" she asked, bewildered by the sudden transformation of her wardrobe. "Mr. Thorne arranged it," Esther replied with a shrug, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He said a wife should look the part. If anything doesn't fit, just let me know, and we'll have it exchanged." Aisha ran her hand hesitantly over a silk dress, feeling the smooth fabric between her fingers. She could only have dreamed of owning such things before. Now she had an entire wardrobe filled with them, but the abundance brought her no joy. Every dress, every pair of shoes was a constant reminder of the price she had paid for them. The following days blurred into a monotonous routine, marked by strained breakfasts and dinners with Elias Thorne conducted with polite but superficial conversation, long hours spent in the library where she dutifully read aloud to him from a variety of books, and solitary walks in the expansive garden. Elias Thorne, to her surprise, did not insist on her constant presence or attempt to exert any control over her movements. He granted her a degree of freedom, but that freedom felt illusory, tainted by the circumstances under which it was given. She was still in a cage, even if it was gilded and lavishly appointed. She was also surprised that Elias never once attempted to get physically close to her. He maintained a strict distance, always polite and proper, treating her with the respect one might show a business partner rather than a wife. Sometimes, she caught his gaze, the single eye visible from behind the mask, lingering on her with a kind of melancholy, but he would immediately look away, as if regretting the momentary lapse. On the 4th evening, while Aisha was reading him a story by Chekhov, he suddenly interrupted her, his voice uncharacteristically direct. "Are you unhappy here?" It wasn't a question, but an observation, a quiet acknowledgement of the unspoken tension that hung between them. Aisha had grown accustomed to the new routine. She spent the majority of her time with him, and it no longer felt like an obligation. Elias turned out to be an unexpectedly engaging conversationalist. He had traveled extensively, was fluent in several languages, and possessed a deep appreciation for art and literature. Behind his gruff millionaire facade lay a highly educated and surprisingly sensitive man. That day, Aisha was scheduled to visit her mother at the clinic. The examinations had confirmed that surgery was possible, and it was scheduled for the following week. Her mother appeared healthier, her spirits lifted. Hope had worked wonders. "How is he?" Lena Hayes asked when they were alone. "Your husband?" Aisha considered the question carefully. He's not who I imagined.
He's a good man, Mom.
Just very lonely and unhappy. Do you love him? Her mother asked gently. No, Aisha answered too quickly. I don't know. It's not love in the conventional sense, but I'm not indifferent to what happens to him, and it's not hard for me to be near him anymore. Lena took her daughter's hand. You know, Aisha, love comes in many forms. It doesn't always strike like lightning, as it does in the romances. Sometimes it grows slowly from care, from understanding. Maybe what you feel is the beginning of something real. Returning to the estate that evening, Aisha sensed an unusual commotion. An unfamiliar car was parked at the entrance, and in the hall, she encountered a tall man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit. You must be Elias's new wife, he said with an unpleasant smirk. Well, I have to give my brother credit. He always had excellent taste. Aisha stopped dead in her tracks. Brother? Excuse me, I don't believe I caught your name. The man extended his hand. Silas Thorne, Elias's younger brother, though I prefer to call myself the less fortunate one. Ill-concealed envy dripped from his voice. Aisha shook his hand coldly. Mister. Someone faked your signature and stole the money. Darius. Elias Thorne gasped. Only he has access to my accounts. Only he could have done this. At that precise moment, the door was flung open and Darius Powell himself appeared on the threshold. In his hand, he held a handgun. What a pity you discovered this so soon, Mr. Thorne, he said coldly, his eyes devoid of emotion. I was hoping for a little more time. Aisha instinctively stepped forward, shielding Elias with her body. Her heart pounded in her chest, threatening to burst. Darius, what are you doing? Elias Thorne's voice trembled, not from fear, but from the profound pain of betrayal. 20 years. 20 years you've been by my side. 20 years I've trusted you. 20 years I was your shadow, the assistant retorted, his face contorted with rage. 20 years I carried out your every whim, smiled, and bowed. You didn't even see me as a person. I was just a function, a tool. And Silas Thorne, he offered me a share. Real money after your death. All I had to do was help it along a little faster. You wanted to kill him? Aisha whispered, aghast.
Didn't want to.
I want to, Darius corrected her icily.
Today, right now.
An accident. The old man fell down the stairs. No one will be able to prove anything. And tomorrow, Silas Thorne inherits everything, and I get my cut. And me? Aisha asked, desperately trying to buy time.
What about me?
You were a witness. Sadly, you tried to help your husband, and you fell too. A tragedy. Elias Thorne attempted to rise from his chair, but Darius aimed the gun directly at him.
Sit down.
Just then, the door behind Darius Powell flew open, and Esther burst into the room, wielding a heavy candlestick in her hands. The blow landed squarely on the back of his head. Darius grunted and collapsed onto the floor, the gun falling from his grasp. I heard, the housekeeper gasped, struggling to catch her breath. I heard everything, and I called the police. It had felt like salvation then, but they were quickly learning that these loan sharks were not the type to show leniency or forgive debt. The apartment door burst open with a violent crash, startling both women. Marcus Hayes stumbled into the room, his disheveled appearance and ashen face instantly signaling that the conversation had gone terribly wrong. Dad, what did they say? The man sank heavily into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Silence hung in the air for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the old clock on the wall. We have 1 week, he finally choked out, his voice raw with despair. 1 week to pay back the debt. Otherwise what? Aisha whispered, though a chilling premonition already gripped her heart. They'll take the apartment. And that's not even the worst of it, is it? What else? Marcus lifted his eyes, meeting his daughter's gaze with an unbearable mixture of pain and shame. They said there's an option. He hesitated, struggling to speak. Their boss is a wealthy man. He saw you once when he came here, and he's willing to forgive the entire debt if you agree to marry him. Aisha felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. She heard the words, but her mind recoiled, refusing to process the horrifying reality. "Are you serious?" she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "Dad, tell me this is some kind of sick joke." "I would never." Marcus's voice cracked with emotion. "Aisha, I would never ask this of you, but they said if we don't pay, they won't just take the apartment. They promised your mother wouldn't live to see the end of the month." Lena gasped, and Aisha felt a chilling numbness spread through her limbs. Fragmented thoughts raced through her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. "Who is he?" she asked, surprised by the unnerving calm in her own voice. "His name is Elias Thorne." Aisha closed the book, marking her place with a slender finger, and looked directly at him. "What did you expect? That I'd be ecstatic?" He sighed heavily, the sound conveying a deep-seated weariness.
No.
"But I hoped that, in time, you would at least grow accustomed to life in captivity. To selling myself?" Bitterness, which she had been trying to suppress, finally broke through her carefully constructed facade. "You saved your family," he countered, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's not a sale, it's a sacrifice." "There's little difference," Aisha retorted, rising from her chair. "May I go? I'm tired." Elias Thorne nodded curtly, and she turned and headed for the door, but his voice stopped her in her tracks. "Aisha, I know what you think of me, and maybe you're right, but believe me, if I had had any other way—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Good night." She left without replying, feeling a strange mixture of resentment and pity. In the corridor, she unexpectedly ran into Darius Powell, who seemed to be waiting for her. "How is he feeling?" the assistant asked, his tone casual. "Tired?" Aisha answered curtly, attempting to brush past him, but he detained her with a probing question. "Do you know why he wears the mask constantly?" He paused, his eyes searching her face. "He said his face is paralyzed after the stroke." Darius looked at her strangely, his expression unreadable. "Yes, of course. That's the only reason." He nodded slowly and then moved on, leaving Aisha perplexed and unsettled. What did he mean by that cryptic response? Was there some other, hidden reason for the mask that she wasn't aware of? The wedding took place exactly 1 week later, as Elias Thorne had promised, a small, perfunctory ceremony at the county clerk's office, devoid of guests, celebration, or any semblance of joy. Only the two of them, Darius Powell as a witness, and some elderly woman Aisha hadn't seen before, were present. "Thorne didn't mention you were coming." "He didn't know," Silas Thorne said, smirking. "I decided to pay my dear brother a visit. I heard about his hasty marriage, and thought I should offer my congratulations." "Where is he, by the way? Still in his quarters?" "Yes, but he shouldn't be disturbed. He recently suffered a fall." I know, Silas interrupted dismissively. "Darius told me everything. His body is completely failing him now, isn't it?" He started past her toward the stairs.
Don't worry.
"I won't tire him out." Aisha wanted to stop him, but at that moment, Elias's voice called from his room. "Let him in, Aisha. He won't rest until he gets his say." Silas Thorne entered his brother's room, and Aisha remained in the corridor, the door left slightly ajar. She unintentionally overheard their conversation. Well, brother," Silas's voice sounded mocking. "You've really gone downhill. Or is this all just another performance?" "What do you want, Silas?" Elias's voice was weary. "Can a relative simply pay a visit? I heard you married a girl young enough to be your granddaughter. Bought yourself a nurse. Watch your language. And what's wrong with that?" Silas laughed. "We both know the truth. You paid for her, like you paid for everything in your life. Business deals, connections, even your first wife." "Celeste didn't marry me for the money," Elias countered, though a hint of uncertainty lingered in his voice. "Keep telling yourself that, but we both know she didn't love you. And, you know what's funny? Neither did Zoe. Your daughter hated you, Elias." Silence descended upon the room. Aisha pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. You saw Zoe?" Elias's voice trembled. "Of course. Celeste called me after your breakup. We met a few times. She wanted advice on how to handle you, and Zoe was with her. Sweet girl.
Too bad she died.
Not a shred of remorse colored Silas's tone. But do you know what? They're already on their way. Aisha rushed to Elias's side. He sat in his chair, pale and in shock. She embraced him tightly, and he clung to her like a child. "It's over," she whispered, stroking his hair. "It's all right. I'm here." The police arrived within 10 minutes. Darius Powell was taken away in handcuffs. It was revealed that Esther had already contacted the bank and blocked the transfer, ensuring that the money remained in Elias's account. The surveillance cameras in the mansion had captured Darius forging Elias's signature. Silas Thorne was also apprehended, his phone revealing a wealth of evidence of their conspiracy. 3 months passed. Aisha sat in the same gazebo by the lake where they had visited with Elias. He sat beside her, but now, he walked without a cane. The rehabilitation program, which had commenced after Darius's arrest, had yielded unexpected results. It turned out that some of his symptoms had been exacerbated by medication that the assistant had been secretly administering. Without those harmful additives, Elias had begun to recover. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "About the strange journey we've taken," Aisha replied, gazing at his face. The paralysis hadn't completely disappeared, but it was significantly reduced. He no longer wore the mask that had once hidden his true self. "We started as strangers, bound by a contract," Elias finished, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And now we're family. A real family, without contracts or conditions." "You know what's funny?" Aisha smiled. "On our wedding night, I thought that when you took off your mask, I would see a monster. But I saw a person. Just a person who needed love. And you gave me that love." Elias Thorne leaned in and kissed her gently, tenderly, the first real kiss in all their months of marriage. In the distance, on the shore of the lake, builders were laying the foundation for a house, the very house Elias had always dreamed of. "He's nearly 60, her father said, his voice barely audible as he kept his gaze fixed on the floor. "They say he can barely walk after an illness, but he's incredibly rich, influential. We don't have a choice, sweetie." The following days passed in a surreal haze. Aisha went about her daily tasks mechanically, caring for her mother, cooking, cleaning, but beneath the surface, a storm of conflicting emotions raged within her. She felt anger at her father's recklessness, overwhelming pity for her mother's suffering, and a paralyzing fear of the unknown future. Worst of all, a gnawing sense of guilt that, deep down, she blamed her parents for the impossible situation she now faced. On the third day, a man arrived from Elias Thorne. He was tall, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit that seemed utterly out of place in their drab apartment, and appeared to be in his early 40s. His very presence seemed to emphasize the stark contrast between their lives and the world he represented. Aisha almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Almost. "My name is Darius Powell," he introduced himself, handing her a business card. "I'm Mr. Thorne's assistant. He asked me to give you this." Aisha took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph of a grand mansion that resembled a palace and a brief, handwritten note. "This will be your home. I promise you will want for nothing." "Mr. Thorne is a man of his word," Darius continued, carefully watching her reaction. "He understands that this situation is unusual, but he's prepared to provide for not just you, but your parents, too. Your mother will receive the best medical care, treatment abroad if necessary." "And what does he get in return?" Aisha's voice was colder than she expected. "I need to know the truth. What does he really want from me?" Darius Powell hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing his words. "Elias Thorne is nearly 60 years old. He is gravely ill after suffering a stroke." Elias Thorne arrived in a formal black suit, leaning heavily on his cane, his movements slow and labored. The mask still concealed the upper half of his face, obscuring his features and adding to the air of mystery that surrounded him. Aisha wore a simple white dress, one of the new additions to her meticulously curated wardrobe. She couldn't bring herself to look in the mirror before leaving, feeling a sense of disconnect from her own reflection. The ceremony was short and joyless, the words spoken by the clerk sounding hollow and meaningless. When he finally pronounced them husband and wife, Elias Thorne made no attempt to kiss the bride, nor did he offer any other gesture of affection. He simply took her hand, his palm surprisingly warm and dry against her own. He whispered, "Thank you," the words barely audible. Aisha didn't answer. A lump had formed in her throat, preventing her from uttering a single word. After the registration, Darius Powell drove them back to the estate. On the way, Aisha stared blankly out the window, her mind numb, not registering the passing scenery. She was now officially Mrs. Thorne, bound to this man by law, by a contract, and by the desperate circumstances that had led her to this point. She suddenly realized that she didn't even know her husband's last name. "What is your last name?" she asked, breaking the oppressive silence that had filled the car. Elias Thorne offered a wry smirk, the gesture barely visible beneath the edge of the mask.
"Thorne.
"And now it's yours." He paused, his voice tinged with bitterness. "It sounds ironic, doesn't it? Thorns are hardly a symbol of loyalty and love, but for us." He didn't finish the sentence, but Aisha understood perfectly. They had a contract, a deal, an arrangement, but certainly not love. That evening, Esther appeared in Aisha's room with a silver tray, her expression impassive. "Mister," she asked me why her father was so cold, why you were never there for her. She cried. "Elias, your daughter cried because of you." "Get out," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please just get out." "One more question, brother. Have you changed your will in favor of your young wife yet?" He paused suggestively. "Or does she still not know that the inheritance promised to her still needs to be formally arranged? I wonder what would happen if you didn't manage to do it. The old will, the one in my name, is still valid." Aisha froze. The will. It hadn't been changed yet. "I plan to rewrite it this week," Elias said, his voice regaining some strength. "I've already made arrangements with the notary." "You plan to," Silas mimicked. "But you haven't rewritten it yet. And given your health, you might not make it. Think about that and how your sweet little wife might just be wasting her time with a dying old man." He strode out of the room and nearly collided with Aisha in the corridor. He smirked at her. "Eavesdropping? That's fine. Now you know the truth. My advice? Hurry him up with that will, or you might be left with nothing." Aisha watched Silas walk away, feeling a tempest of emotions churning within her. His words echoed in her head. "Hurry him up with the will, or you might be left with nothing." She slowly entered Elias's quarters. He was sitting on the bed with his back to the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The mask lay discarded on the nightstand. He had stopped wearing it around Aisha after the night he fell. Hearing her approach, he didn't turn around. "You heard everything." It wasn't a question. "Yes." Aisha walked closer. "Is it true? The will is still in his name?" Elias Thorne sighed heavily and finally turned to face her. His face, contorted by the paralysis, appeared especially forlorn in the soft glow of the evening lamps. "Yes. I drew it up years ago, when Silas and I were still on decent terms. Now it was no longer just a dream, but a tangible reality, their future together." And nestled in Elias Thorne's jacket pocket was a new document, a will that bequeathed his entire estate to Aisha, not because she was his contract wife, but because she had saved his life, and more importantly, given him love. I'm really glad you're here, and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from, and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch. The left side of his body is barely functional. He walks with great difficulty, relying on a cane and the assistance of a nurse. The doctors give him a year, maybe 2 at most. He has no heirs, no family. He is alone. The man paused, his expression unreadable. He wants to spend the rest of his life not in solitude. He needs company, a wife who will be by his side. So, I'm supposed to be a glorified nurse? Bitterness laced Aisha's voice. A wife, Darius corrected gently. A lawful wife. After his death, you will inherit his entire estate. It is a substantial fortune. Believe me, your family will be set for life. Aisha glanced toward her mother, who was lying in the next room, having undoubtedly heard every word of the conversation. Their eyes met, and in Lena's weary gaze, Aisha saw a silent plea and a heartbreaking willingness to sacrifice everything, even her own well-being, to spare her daughter from such a devastating choice. I have conditions, Aisha said, surprising herself with the unwavering firmness in her voice. My mother's treatment begins immediately. My father's debt is completely nullified today, and I want to meet him before the wedding. Mr. Thorne, he prefers not to show himself before the wedding, Darius began, but Aisha cut him off. Those are my conditions. Either I see him beforehand, or there's no deal. The assistant pulled out his phone and stepped toward the window, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. Aisha could only catch fragments of the hushed conversation. She insists, I understand. Okay, I'll tell her. Finally, he turned back to her. Mr. Thorne agrees. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a car will pick you up and take you to the estate. He handed her another envelope, this one noticeably thicker. This is an advance for your mother's treatment. You'll receive the rest after the marriage registration. As soon as Darius had left, Aisha opened the envelope. Thorne asked me to tell you that dinner will be in his quarters tonight, the housekeeper said, placing the tray on the small table. He expects you at 9 p.m. this evening. In his quarters? Aisha repeated, her heart skipping a beat. But we always dine in the dining room. Today is a special day, Esther replied, avoiding her gaze. The wedding, after all. As soon as the housekeeper had left, Aisha sank onto the bed, her limbs suddenly weak. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She knew that this moment had to come eventually, but she was still utterly unprepared for it. All day she had desperately tried to convince herself that Elias was too sick, too frail to expect any kind of conjugal relations. But what if she was wrong? What if this was the price she would ultimately have to pay for her family's salvation? At 9 p.m., summoning all her remaining resolve, she forced herself to walk down to the first floor. Elias Thorne's private quarters were located in the east wing of the mansion, an area she had never ventured into before. The corridor was dimly lit, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls and adding to the sense of foreboding that weighed heavily on her. With a trembling hand, she knocked softly on the massive oak door. Come in, his voice called out from within, the sound strangely amplified in the silent corridor. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was unexpectedly modest and understated, a stark contrast to the opulent grandeur of the rest of the mansion. A large bed. At the very least, I deserve to know who shares my roof, Elias Thorne stated, leaning back in his chair. His fingers tightened around the glass he held. The fireplace cast dancing, eerie shadows across his face, giving him the spectral appearance of someone from a bygone era. I was born into poverty, he began, his voice heavy with memory. After Zoe's death, I just didn't see the point in changing it. There was no one left to leave the fortune to. He looked at her intently. When you agreed to marry me, I immediately instructed Darius to contact the notary. I intended to transfer everything to you. Why didn't you do it sooner? The notary was out of town. He won't be back until the day after tomorrow. I was going to tell you. He stopped, hesitating. I was afraid you'd think I was trying to buy your affection. That money was the only thing I could offer. Aisha sat down on a stool near the bed, her thoughts racing. Darius had promised her the inheritance even before the wedding. So, Elias had truly planned to change the will from the very beginning. But what if he didn't make it? What if something happened before the meeting with the notary? What are you thinking about? Elias Thorne asked softly. I'm thinking Silas is right, she admitted. I agreed to this marriage because of the money. Not for myself, but still because of money. That makes me no better than the buyers you told me about. No. Elias Thorne countered sharply. You're not like that. Silas said those things intentionally, to cause trouble between us. He's envious and greedy. He always has been. I helped him, gave him money for his business, bailed him out of debt, but he always wanted more. He wanted what I had, but he didn't want to work for it. He paused, pain crossing his face. He said I bought everything in life, even Celeste. Elias Thorne closed his eyes, and a grimace of pain crossed his face. Maybe he's right. Maybe I truly did think that money solved everything. I showered Celeste with gifts, bought her a huge house, an expensive car. I thought that was love, giving a person everything they desired. But I forgot the most important thing, to give her myself, my time, my attention. He opened his eyes and looked at Aisha, with sincerity. With you, I don't want to repeat that mistake. Inside was more money than she had ever seen in her entire life. Her father, who had been peering over her shoulder, visibly paled at the sight. God, Aisha, maybe we shouldn't, he stammered, his voice filled with renewed doubt. We'll figure something else out. No, Dad, Aisha said firmly, steeling herself against his wavering resolve. We won't figure something else out. We've run out of options. She took a deep breath. Tomorrow I'll go and look at this man, and then I'll decide. Sleep eluded Aisha that night. She lay staring at the ceiling, her mind racing, fixated on how drastically and irrevocably life could change in such a short span of time. Just a month ago, she had been an ordinary young woman with ordinary dreams, finding a decent job, meeting someone special, starting a family. Now, she was contemplating selling herself into marriage to save her parents from financial ruin and, potentially, death. A sleek black sedan arrived precisely at 3 p.m. the following day. Aisha donned her best dress, a simple dark burgundy one she had been saving for special occasions. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. She was dressing up to meet the man who had, in essence, purchased her future. Her mother wept as she saw her off, while her father stood silently apart, unable to meet her gaze, racked with guilt and shame. Aisha embraced Lena tightly and whispered, "It's going to be okay, Mom. I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The drive to the estate took about an hour. The car traveled beyond the city limits, winding along narrow country roads between verdant fields and groves, until it reached towering gates adorned with elaborate gilded flourishes. Beyond the gates, the grounds unfolded like a meticulously maintained park, boasting perfectly manicured lawns, ornate fountains, and majestic avenues of ancient trees. My father was a drunk, and my mother juggled 2 jobs just to keep food on the table for my brother and me. I learned early on that if I wanted to get anywhere in life, I'd have to claw my way to the top. So, I studied relentlessly, went to college, and worked any job I could find. He paused, the silence amplifying the crackling fire. Then came the boom, a period of immense chaos, but also vast opportunities and daunting risks. I took a gamble, secured a loan, and started a small business. Luck was on my side. The business exploded, and soon there were more, each one building upon the last. After a decade, I was a wealthy man. 20 years later, very wealthy. And were you alone through all of that? Aisha inquired, her voice soft. No, he replied, a sharp bitterness creeping into his tone. I was married to Celeste. She was beautiful, intelligent. I thought I was in love. We married when I was 35, and we had a daughter. Aisha visibly winced at this revelation.
A daughter.
So, he had once known a family life. What happened? She asked gently. I was consumed by my business, Elias Thorne said, his gaze fixed on the flames as if reliving the past. Constant travel, endless meetings, deal after deal. I told myself I was providing for them, giving them the best life possible, but in reality, I was simply absent. Celeste grew lonely. His voice turned hard. And then she met another man, my former business partner. They carried on an affair behind my back for a year. When I discovered it, there was a terrible scene. Celeste took our daughter and left with him. And your daughter?
How old was she?
12. Her name was Zoe. He clenched his fist, the memory clearly painful. I tried to fight for her, but my wife poisoned the child against me. She told Zoe that I had abandoned them, that money was more important to me. Zoe stopped speaking to me. He paused, his voice heavy. And then there was the accident. I don't want money to be the only thing between us. But we already had a deal, Aisha said, her voice trembling slightly. You bought me. You paid for my company. Isn't that the same thing? At first, yes, Elias admitted. But now, Aisha, tell me honestly. When you sat by my bed the night I fell, when you read me books, when you cared for me this past week, did you do it only because I paid for your mother's treatment, or was there something else? Aisha remained silent. She didn't know how to respond, because she didn't fully understand her own feelings. When she cared for Elias, it wasn't merely a chore. Moreover, she had found herself genuinely concerned about him when he was unwell. But was that love, or simply pity for a lonely, sick man? I don't know, she finally confessed. I truly care about what happens to you, but I can't say I love you. That would be a lie. I'm not asking for love, Elias Thorne said softly, reaching out to gently cover her hand with his. I'm just asking you not to leave, to stay with me until the end, and not because of the money, not because of the will, but simply because I feel better when you're near. Aisha gazed at their joined hands. His palm was warm, and his fingers gently squeezed her hand. In that simple touch, there was no demand, no insistence, only a request and hope. All right, she whispered. I'll stay. They sat in silence for several minutes. Then, Aisha cautiously withdrew her hand. You need to rest and I need to think. She left the room and went to her own. All night, sleep evaded her. She tossed and turned, replaying her conversations with Elias and Silas's unsettling words in her mind. By morning, she had reached a decision. At breakfast, she stated firmly, I want you not to change the will. Elias dropped the fork he was about to use to eat his omelet, a look of utter disbelief on his face.
What?
Don't change the will in my name, Aisha repeated, her voice steady. At the heart of this breathtaking splendor stood the mansion, a grand 3-story building with imposing columns and sweeping balconies that left Aisha breathless. Darius Powell greeted her at the entrance, a strange, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. Welcome, he said smoothly. Mr. Thorne is waiting for you in the library. Please follow me. Inside, the mansion was even more awe-inspiring than its exterior suggested. Gleaming marble floors, shimmering crystal chandeliers, and priceless paintings in ornate gilded frames adorned the walls. Aisha felt as if she had stepped into a museum, a world far removed from her own humble existence. Their footsteps echoed softly in the spacious corridors as they made their way through the opulent interior. The library was located on the 2nd floor. Darius opened the massive oak door and stepped aside, allowing Aisha to enter first. The room was vast, its walls lined from floor to ceiling with an impressive collection of books. Near the window, seated in a high-backed chair with his back to the door, was a man. Aisha could only discern his silhouette, broad shoulders and gray hair hinting at his age. Mr. Thorne, your guest, the assistant announced and then discreetly withdrew, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving Aisha alone with the man she was about to meet. A weighty, oppressive silence descended upon the room. The man remained motionless, his back still turned, and Aisha was uncertain whether to approach or wait for him to acknowledge her presence. Finally, she took a few tentative steps forward. Hello, she said, her voice barely audible in the cavernous space. Come closer, a deep voice commanded, the sound resonating with an unexpected strength. I want to see you. Aisha slowly walked around the chair and stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Before her sat a man whose face was partially concealed by a bizarre half-mask that covered the upper portion of his face and one eye. Aisha froze, sensing the weight of the tragedy that was about to unfold. Celeste and her new husband were driving.
Zoe was with them.
A drunk driver crossed the median. Elias Thorne fell silent, and Aisha noticed his hand trembling slightly. All 3 died instantly. Zoe was 16. I am so sorry, Aisha whispered, her voice filled with genuine empathy for the first time. After that, I shut everyone out. Elias Thorne continued, his voice flat. I buried myself even deeper in my work. I built this estate, envisioning it as a family nest where I could someday welcome my grandchildren. Foolish, wasn't it? He offered a bitter smile. Then the stroke happened. The doctor said it was stress, overwork, and age catching up to me. I found myself trapped in this failing body, half of which no longer functions. Aisha looked at him, and something shifted within her. This wasn't just a wealthy, aging man who had purchased a young wife. He was a broken man, a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. That's why you wear the mask, she realized aloud. Not just because of the paralysis. Elias Thorne gave a curt nod. I don't want to see pity in people's eyes. It's enough that I see it reflected in the mirror every morning. They sat in silence, the only sound the gentle crackling of the fire. Aisha absorbed everything she had heard. Her own pain hadn't vanished, but she now understood that Elias was suffering, too, in his own way. The room I chose, she said suddenly, breaking the silence. Darius Powell mentioned someone had lived there before. Was it Zoe's room? Elias Thorne visibly recoiled as if struck. Yes, he managed, his voice strained. I furnished it, prepared it for my daughter's return, always hoping she would visit me someday. But she never did. After her death, I ordered it closed. No one has entered it for almost 7 years. Should I choose another room? Aisha offered, sensitive to his feelings. No, he replied sharply. I don't want money hanging between us. I don't want to be constantly thinking about the inheritance every time you're not feeling well. And I certainly don't want you to think that I'm only here for that reason. Aisha, this is insane, Elias Thorne said, shaking his head. You married me on the understanding that you would receive financial security. I can't. You can. Aisha interrupted him. You owe me nothing. Mom is already receiving treatment. Dad's debts are settled. That's enough. The rest should only be given if I truly deserve it, not as a contract wife, but as... She paused, searching for the right words, as someone you genuinely hold dear. Elias Thorne looked at her for a long time, and tears glistened in his visible eye. You are amazing, he whispered, his voice full of emotion. Absolutely amazing. I just don't want to live with the thought that I'm waiting for you to die for the money, Aisha confessed. What you've already done for my family is more than enough. And if you still want to leave me something, only do it when you are certain I deserve it, not before. Darius Powell appeared in the doorway, his presence interrupting the profound moment between them. Mr. Thorne, the notary became available sooner than anticipated. He can come this evening, if that's convenient for you. Elias and Aisha exchanged a long, searching glance. He raised an eyebrow questioningly, and she gave a small nod of confirmation. The decision had been made. Tell him I've changed my... Don't trouble yourself about it, Elias Thorne told his assistant, his tone firm. My will remains unchanged. Darius Powell's surprise was evident as he glanced between them, but he held his tongue, offering only a nod before excusing himself. The following days were thick with an unspoken tension. Aisha sensed a shift in her relationship with Elias after her refusal of the inheritance. Only his chin, covered in a salt and pepper stubble, and his thin lips were visible. His left arm lay lifelessly on the armrest, while his right hand rested firmly on the ornate pommel of a walking cane. Don't be afraid, he smirked, evidently noticing her involuntary reaction. The stroke spared neither body nor face. The left side is paralyzed. The face is distorted. An unpleasant sight, I agree. That's why I wear this mask. Aisha swallowed, trying to regain her composure. His voice was surprisingly strong, belying the image of a frail patient. Sit. He nodded toward a chair positioned opposite him. I imagine you have questions. Why me? Aisha blurted out, taking the offered seat. You have so much money. You could hire company by affection. Why force me to marry you? Elias Thorne was silent for a few seconds, as if carefully considering his answer. Because you won't come to me out of greed, he finally said, his voice low and deliberate. You aren't here because you want my money for yourself. You are here for your family. That speaks volumes about your character. He paused, his gaze intense. My whole life, I've been surrounded by people who wanted something from me, money, connections, influence. Not a single person who was with me just to be with me. And you think I will be with you just to be with you? Aisha couldn't help but retort, the skepticism evident in her tone. You just said yourself that I'm here for my family. Yes, but at least you are honest about your motives, he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. And I know you won't betray me. Your loyalty to your family is a guarantee that you will fulfill your part of the bargain. What part exactly? Aisha asked, her anxiety mounting.
What do you want from me?
Elias Thorne struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. He was indeed barely able to stand without assistance, his left leg dragging slightly across the floor as he moved. Just be near me, he said wearily. On the contrary, let there be life in that room again. Let it not stand as an empty mausoleum. He stood, leaning heavily on his cane. It's late. You should get some rest. Aisha stood as well, but lingered at the door. Mr. Thorne, thank you for sharing your story with me. I truly am sorry for your loss. It's all in the past, he said, waving her off dismissively, although she could sense the tension in his shoulders. Good night, Aisha. Aisha retreated to her room, but sleep eluded her for a long time. Elias Thorne's tragic tale haunted her thoughts. She pictured the young Zoe, a girl who existed within these walls only in her father's dreams, a girl who never knew a home was waiting for her. The next morning, Aisha awoke to the sound of rain. Gray drops hammered against the windows, turning the garden into a blurred watercolor painting. She dressed and went down for breakfast, but Elias was not at the table. He's not feeling well, Esther explained, pouring her coffee. The doctor is with him now. He should be better by lunchtime. Is it serious? Aisha asked, surprised by her own concern. An exacerbation, the housekeeper replied, shaking her head. It happens after stress or overexertion. Yesterday was a hard day for him. The wedding, talking about the past. Aisha felt a sharp pang of guilt. Can I visit him? Esther raised her eyebrows in surprise. Of course.
You're his wife now.
Just wait until the doctor finishes his examination. Aisha spent the morning in the library, attempting to read, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Elias. Around noon, Darius Powell appeared. Mr. Thorne requests your presence, if you wouldn't mind. She followed him to her husband's suite. Elias Thorne was lying in bed, looking pale, yet he still hadn't removed his mask. Seeing Aisha, he attempted to rise, but she gestured for him to remain still. Lie still. How are you feeling? I'll live, he said, offering a faint smile. I'm sorry I ruined your first day of marriage. He regarded her with a newfound respect and affection, a tenderness that had been absent before. She, in turn, found herself longing for his presence more frequently when he was not around. Her mother's surgery was a resounding success. Aisha spent the entire day at the clinic, her hand clasped tightly in her father's, who was consumed by worry. When the surgeon emerged from the operating room with the good news, Marcus Hayes was overcome with emotion, tears streaming down his face. Aisha felt the crushing weight she had carried for months finally lift from her shoulders. That evening, she returned to the estate, exhausted but elated. Elias Thorne awaited her in the library, and when she shared the news, a genuine smile touched his face, momentarily softening his distorted features. I'm happy, Aisha. Truly happy for you and your family. And it's all thanks to you, you know. She settled into the seat beside his armchair. If it weren't for you, Mom wouldn't have had this chance. Then I've managed to do at least one thing right in this life. He took her hand in his. You know, I've been giving a lot of thought to what you said about the will, and I want you to understand that I will still ensure you're taken care of. Perhaps not through the will itself, but there are other avenues. A trust fund, for instance. Silas wouldn't be able to challenge that. Mr. Thorne, please. He squeezed her hand gently. Allow me to do this. Not because you're contractually obligated as my wife, but because you've become precious to me. Very precious indeed. I simply cannot allow you to be left with nothing after I'm gone, while Silas wallows in wealth. Aisha gazed into his eyes, seeing a sincerity that made refusal impossible. All right, she conceded, but only a reasonable amount, not the entire fortune. Is that a deal? Elias Thorne exhaled with relief. They remained in the library late into the evening, lost in conversations about books, about life, about dreams. Dine with me.
Talk to me.
Read me books. Create the illusion that I have a family, that I am not dying alone. He turned toward the window, his shoulders slumping. That's all. Aisha looked at the stooped figure by the window and felt a strange mix of pity and revulsion. Pity because he was a dying, lonely man, facing his mortality with no one to share it with, and revulsion because he was using his immense wealth to essentially buy companionship without any regard for what she wanted or the sacrifices she was being forced to make. And if I refuse? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. If I stand up right now and leave? Elias Thorne turned, and his single visible eye flashed with something akin to surprise. Then the money I gave for your mother's treatment will have to be returned, and your father's debt will remain.
I won't hold you here by force.
The choice is always yours, Aisha. She rose from her chair and approached the window, standing beside him. From this vantage point, there was a breathtaking view of the meticulously landscaped garden, bathed in the warm, golden light of the pre-sunset hour. Somewhere beyond those high walls and sprawling grounds was her old life, the small, cramped apartment, the sick mother, the guilt-ridden father, the constant poverty and hopelessness. When is the wedding? She asked, her voice flat and devoid of emotion as she kept her gaze fixed on the picturesque landscape. In 1 week, he replied, a quiet ceremony, only the bare necessities. No celebrations, unless you object. I don't object. Aisha turned to him, her expression unreadable. I have one more condition. I'm listening. I want to continue visiting my parents regularly, and I want them to be able to visit here when Mom feels better. Elias Thorne nodded slowly. Of course.
This is your home now.
You can invite anyone you wish. He took a few labored steps toward the door, each movement a visible effort. Darius will show you to your rooms. Nonsense. Aisha replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed and sitting down. You need to rest. Perhaps I should read something to you? Elias looked at her in surprise. You don't have to. I know, but I want it. She picked up a volume of Chekhov's short stories from the bedside table and began to read. Her voice was calm and melodious, filling the room with its soothing cadence. Elias Thorne closed his eyes, and for the first time in days, his face seemed at peace. She read for about an hour. When she finished the story, she noticed that Elias had fallen asleep. Quietly, she stood, preparing to leave, but his voice stopped her. Don't go, please. Aisha turned back. He hadn't opened his eyes, but his hand was slightly outstretched toward her. Just sit here. I feel better when you're near. She returned to the chair, and they sat in silence. The rain intensified outside, turning into a torrential downpour. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. And in that quiet space, Aisha realized with a start that she didn't feel as burdened as she had before. Something had shifted after their conversation the previous day. That evening, when Elias was feeling better, they dined together in his room. He ate sparingly, but his mood was noticeably improved. Darius has made arrangements with a clinic for your mother, he said between courses. She'll be brought in for a full diagnostic examination the day after tomorrow. They have the best specialists. Thank you, Aisha said, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. You can't imagine how much this means to me. I can imagine, he replied, taking a sip of water. Family is the most precious thing. I realized that too late. He paused.
But you still have time.
You have your whole life ahead of you. You do, too, Aisha countered softly. Doctors can be wrong. Elias Thorne smiled sadly. My dear, I've already made peace with my fate, but I'm grateful to fate for sending you to me, even if it's only at the end. Elias spoke of the places he had visited, the countries he longed to show Aisha, if his health permitted. She listened intently, picturing those journeys in her mind, and felt a pang of sadness, knowing they would likely never come to pass. "What are you thinking about?" Elias Thorne inquired, noticing her wistful expression. "I'm thinking how unfair it is. You possess so much knowledge, so much experience, and now you're confined to this house, to this chair." She paused, a thought striking her. "You dreamed of showing me the world, but we both know that's just not feasible anymore." "Not everything is lost, Aisha." Elias Thorne offered a rare and unexpected smile. "I have an idea, a surprise, if you will. You'll discover what it is tomorrow." The following morning, Aisha was awakened by a knock on her door. Esther entered, carrying a breakfast tray and wearing a secretive smile. "Mr. Thorne asked me to tell you to dress warmly and come down to the main entrance at 10 o'clock sharp." "What's happening?" Aisha asked, her curiosity piqued. "You'll see soon enough." The housekeeper only offered another enigmatic smile. Precisely at 10 o'clock, Aisha made her way downstairs. Elias Thorne was waiting for her at the entrance, clad in a warm coat and leaning heavily on his cane. Darius Powell stood discreetly nearby. "We're going for a ride," Elias announced, a hint of excitement in his voice. "I want to show you a place." They settled into the car, a spacious SUV with comfortable seating, and set off. The journey lasted about an hour. Aisha gazed out the window as the scenery unfolded: fields, groves, small towns. Elias remained silent, but a faint smile played on his lips. Finally, they arrived at a small, secluded lake nestled amidst a dense woods. The shoreline was carpeted with vibrant autumn leaves. The water was still and crystal clear, mirroring the sky above. "You can choose whichever one you like, except mine." Aisha hesitated. "Wait." Elias Thorne paused, turning back to face her. "I haven't given you a final yes yet." The man's lips curved into a faint semblance of a smile. "But you've already made your decision. I can see it in your eyes." He reached for the door, his hand trembling slightly. "Welcome to the Gilded Cage, Aisha." As the door closed behind him, the young woman sank back into the chair and covered her face with her hands. There were no tears. She had seemingly shed them all in the preceding days. Only a profound emptiness and bone-deep exhaustion remained. Darius Powell reappeared approximately 10 minutes later and led her through the labyrinthine mansion. There were so many rooms, each more lavishly decorated than the last, that Aisha quickly lost count. Living rooms, dining rooms, billiard rooms, a well-equipped gym, and a serene winter garden filled with exotic plants. The bedrooms were located on the third floor, forming an entire suite of rooms with soaring ceilings and expansive windows that offered breathtaking views. "This entire wing of the estate is entirely at your disposal," the assistant explained smoothly. "Mr. Thorne occupies rooms on the first floor. It's difficult for him to manage the stairs." He paused, gesturing to the various rooms. "You may choose any bedroom you desire." Aisha stopped by a room situated in the corner of the building. The windows offered panoramic views of the meticulously manicured garden on one side and a dense, ancient wood on the other. The room was bright and spacious, the furniture substantial but not ostentatious. "This one," she said simply, her voice lacking any inflection. "An excellent choice," Darius approved, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Someone used to live here." He paused, seeming to stumble over his words. "Never mind. Tomorrow I'll arrange for your personal belongings to be brought here. And now, allow me to escort you to dinner, Mr." They stayed up late that night talking about everything and nothing. Elias shared stories from his youth, and Aisha spoke about the library where she had worked and the books she loved. With each passing minute, the wall between them seemed to grow thinner. When Aisha returned to her room, it was well past midnight. She lay in bed, closing her eyes, but sleep remained elusive. Elias Thorne's words echoed in her mind. "I feel better when you're near." Such a simple phrase, yet filled with such profound loneliness. Suddenly, a scream pierced the silence. Aisha leaped out of bed and rushed down the stairs without hesitation. The cry originated from Elias's suite, desperate, filled with pain. She flung the door open and froze on the threshold. Elias Thorne lay on the floor near his bed, curled up in agony. The mask had slipped to the side, partially revealing his face. His overturned cane lay nearby. "Mr. Thorne." Aisha rushed to his side. "What happened?" "I fell," he gasped out through clenched teeth. "I was trying to get to the bathroom. My leg gave out." "Don't move," she instructed urgently. She grabbed the phone from the nightstand and dialed the number saved under Darius's name. The assistant answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Come immediately and call a doctor. Mr. Thorne has fallen." While they waited, Aisha carefully helped him sit up, leaning his back against the bed. Elias Thorne was breathing heavily, his face contorted in pain. The mask dangled from its cord, fully exposing his face. Aisha saw him completely for the first time. The left side was indeed paralyzed, the eyelid drooping, the corner of his mouth frozen in an unnatural position. But that wasn't what made her catch her breath. Even through the ravages of illness, through the gray hair and wrinkles, she saw features that seemed vaguely familiar, something in the shape of his cheekbones, the line of his jaw, the set of his eyes. Beside the water's edge stood a charming wooden gazebo, perfectly positioned to offer an unobstructed view of the lake. "This is my favorite spot," Elias said as they emerged from the car. Darius assisted him as they made their way to the gazebo. "I bought this land many years ago. I always intended to build a house here, but I never quite got around to it. And then the stroke happened, and I decided that I wouldn't be able to return. Too far, too difficult with my health," he added ruefully. "So why did we come?" Aisha asked, taking a seat next to him on the gazebo bench. "Because I realized that if not now, then it may never happen." Elias Thorne gazed out at the lake, his voice tinged with emotion. "I can't show you Paris or Rome. I can't take you to the mountains or the sea. But I can share what is most precious to me. This place, this beauty." Aisha felt a lump form in her throat. She studied the lake, the trees reflected in its surface, the tranquil and serene scene around them, and understood that it was indeed beautiful, perhaps even more so than the famous sights of the world. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. This is a truly special place." They sat there for well over an hour, simply reveling in the peace and quiet. Elias Thorne recounted the story of how he had discovered the lake, how he had envisioned building a small home for his family there. Aisha listened attentively, imagining what his life might have been like if fate had taken a different course. On the return journey, Elias Thorne drifted off to sleep in the car, his head resting gently on Aisha's shoulder. She remained perfectly still, afraid to disturb him, and studied his face. Even distorted by paralysis, it now seemed familiar, even endearing. Once, she had only seen an old, ailing man who had purchased her. Now, she saw a person, a man with a broken heart who was seeking warmth and connection before the end. "Thorne expects you in the small dining room at 7 p.m. Left alone, Aisha walked to the window and leaned her forehead against the cool glass, finding a small measure of comfort in the sensation. Down below, a gardener was meticulously clipping hedges, creating a peaceful, ordinary scene that stood in stark contrast to the turmoil raging within her. She recalled Elias Thorne's words about the gilded cage and how accurately he had captured the essence of her situation. Everything was here, wealth, comfort, security, everything, that is, except freedom. At 7 p.m. that evening, she reluctantly made her way down to the small dining room. In reality, even the small dining room was the size of their entire apartment. A long, polished table was meticulously set for two people at opposite ends, emphasizing the distance between them. Elias Thorne was already seated in his designated place, the ever-present mask still concealing the upper half of his face. "Please sit." He gestured to the seat opposite him, his voice courteous but distant. Dinner proceeded in an oppressive silence. Aisha barely touched her food, even though the dishes were exquisitely prepared and presented. Elias Thorne ate slowly, struggling to manipulate his fork with his right hand. "Tell me about yourself," he finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "What did you do before all this? What do you like?" "I worked at the public library," Aisha replied shortly, her gaze fixed on her plate. I love to read. What kind of books? Classics, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. I read modern fiction, too. We have a large library here, he noted, his gaze unwavering. You can take any book you wish. I love to read, too, but my sight is failing now. It would be pleasant if you would read to me aloud sometimes. Aisha nodded curtly without meeting his eyes, offering no further comment. After dinner, Aisha retreated to her room and stood by the window for a long time, gazing out into the darkness. Don't look, Elias Thorne mumbled, attempting to turn his head away, but Aisha gently stopped him. It's okay. You know I'm not squeamish. She took a towel from the armchair and carefully wiped the sweat from his forehead. Where does it hurt the most? My leg. I think I twisted my ankle. 10 minutes later, Darius Powell burst into the room, followed by the doctor, an elderly man with gray temples and tired eyes. While the doctor examined Elias, Aisha stood aside, making it clear she had no intention of leaving. A sprain, the doctor confirmed. A severe bruise. We'll need to immobilize it. Several days of bed rest are essential. I'll manage, Elias began, but the doctor cut him off. You'll need help, constant help. You cannot be alone, Mr. Thorne. In your condition, any fall could end up much worse. He has me, Aisha interjected, surprising even herself. I'll take care of him. The three men, Elias, the doctor, and Darius, stared at her. Aisha, you don't have to, Elias began, but she raised her hand, silencing him. I am officially your wife, and wives care for their husbands when they are ill, so don't argue. The doctor nodded approvingly and began issuing instructions. Aisha listened intently, memorizing every word. When the doctor and Darius Powell finally left, she helped Elias move back onto the bed. Why are you doing this? He asked softly as she covered him with a blanket. We both know this isn't a real marriage. Aisha sat on the edge of the bed. Maybe it's not real in the usual sense, but you've helped my family. You gave my mother a chance to live, and I can't just stand by when you're in pain. Elias Thorne looked at her for a long moment, and something akin to tears glistened in his one visible eye. You are amazing, he whispered. Zoe would have been just as kind, just as compassionate. Tell me about her, Aisha requested. What was she like? And she suddenly realized, with a jolt, that she had fallen in love. Not passionately, not madly, but quietly, deeply, truly. The realization both shocked and frightened her. She had fallen in love with a dying man, a man who had so little time left. That evening, while Elias Thorne was resting after their outing, Esther knocked softly on Aisha's door. The housekeeper's face was etched with concern. We have a problem, she said quietly. I overheard Darius Powell's phone conversation. He was speaking to Silas Thorne about Mr. Thorne's health, about him leaving the house today. Silas asked when the end might come, and Darius replied, soon. Very soon. Aisha felt a chill run down her spine. You think? I don't know what to think. Esther shook her head gravely. But I don't like what I heard. Darius Powell has worked for Mr. Thorne for 20 years, but he's also well acquainted with Silas. And if the will still favors the younger brother. She didn't finish the sentence, but Aisha understood perfectly. We have to warn Mr. Thorne. Warn him of what? The housekeeper threw up her hands in frustration. We have no real proof, just suspicions. And Mr. Thorne trusts Darius implicitly. Then I'll be more watchful, Aisha said decisively. I won't leave his side for a moment. For the next few days, she made good on her promise, scarcely leaving Elias Thorne's side. They shared breakfast together in the mornings. During the day, she read aloud to him, or they simply engaged in quiet conversation. In the evenings, they dined together. Darius Powell made several attempts to draw her away under various pretenses, some documents that required her signature, or a discussion about redecorating her room. But Aisha invariably found a reason to remain with Elias. She noticed the assistant's frowns, the irritated glances he directed her way, but he remained silent, not pressing the issue. Perhaps Esther was mistaken, she thought. The stars in the night sky seemed distant and cold, mirroring the sterile and isolating nature of her new life. She tried to envision herself living here permanently, to accept that this was now her home, but the thought refused to take root in her mind. In the morning, she was awakened by a soft knock on the door. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a severe gray dress, stood on the threshold, her expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," she said with a slight, unidentifiable accent. "My name is Esther. I am the housekeeper. Mr. Thorne asked me to inform you that breakfast is served at 8 a.m. Your belongings have been delivered, and I arranged for them to be placed in the dressing room." Aisha walked into the dressing room and stopped abruptly at the threshold, her eyes widening in disbelief. Her modest suitcase of clothes looked pathetically out of place amidst the array of new dresses, suits, and shoes that lined the walls. Everything was expensive, impeccably tailored, and clearly chosen to fit her size and style. And Elias Thorne proceeded to tell her about the little girl with pigtails who adored reading fairy tales, about how she dreamed of becoming a doctor, about her laughter that sounded like bells. He spoke, and tears streamed down his face, no longer hidden by the mask. Aisha held his hand and listened in silence. Later, when he fell asleep, exhausted by pain and memories, she remained sitting near him, not in her luxurious room on the 3rd floor, but in the armchair beside his bed. In the morning, she awoke to someone covering her with a throw blanket. Opening her eyes, she saw Esther. "You sat up all night," the housekeeper said, shaking her head. "Go wash up and change your clothes. I'll sit with him." But as soon as Aisha stood, Elias opened his eyes. "You're here." A note of relief was evident in his voice. "I'm here," she nodded. "And I'm not going anywhere." The following days were challenging. Aisha hardly left Elias's side, assisting him with every aspect of his care. She read him books, brought him his meals, helped him move, and with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. A week passed since Elias's fall. Perhaps the conversation had been entirely innocent, but then something occurred that dispelled all doubts. It happened a week after their trip to the lake. Aisha arrived at Elias Thorne's room with his morning tea, as she did every day. He was seated in his armchair by the window, holding a document. His face was ashen. "What's wrong?" Aisha asked, her voice laced with alarm. Elias Thorne wordlessly handed her the paper. It was a printout of a bank transfer. A substantial sum of money had been moved from his account to an offshore account 3 days prior. The signature on the transfer document was his, Elias's. "I didn't do this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Aisha, I didn't sign this transfer. I never even saw this document." Aisha examined the signature closely. It was indeed remarkably similar to Elias Thorne's handwriting, which she had observed countless times. But there was one subtle difference, the final letter of the surname. Elias always drew it with a distinctive flourish. Here, the flourish was missing. "It's a forgery," she declared.